Now, I've done a lot of videos on the David, spelled d4vd case. We've covered everything from the initial discovery of the body to the identification of who was initially Jane Doe as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, to the timeline itself, all the details in between, and the initial arrest. However, one thing we haven't touched on is the person himself. Not the case, not the charges, the actual human being behind all of it. Who really was David before any of this? Who was David Anthony Burke before the world knew his name?
What's up, everybody? My name is David. What's going on, squad? It's David here.
So I decided to do some extensive research on David. And the more I dug into his childhood specifically, the more I realized something. This is a story about a kid who spent a majority of his time in solitude, spent most of his teenage years by himself in a room. A kid who, by his own account, felt completely disconnected from the people around him. And out of that isolation, he built something that connected with millions of people who felt the exact same way. However, that same isolation also shaped him in ways that I think are worth understanding. So let's talk about it. Where he came from, what shaped him, and what his actual life looked like before the world knew his name. Today's about staying objective, about understanding that no matter what somebody is accused of, the reality is that the story of who they were before all of it still matters. The childhood of any person is a fundamental part of understanding how they got to where they ended up. That's true for anyone, and David Burke is no exception. Chapter 1. A Quiet Life in a Loud City. The story starts in one of the most iconic cities on the planet, New York City, specifically Queens, one of the 5 boroughs, one of the most densely populated, culturally layered, ethnically diverse places in the entire world. A place that's produced everyone from Nas to Run DMC to Nicki Minaj. A place with its own energy, its own identity, its own way of shaping the people who grow up there. And it's in Queens in 2005 where this story begins. David Anthony Burke was born on March 28, 2005 in Queens, New York City. His parents, Colleen and Dawood Burke. Colleen, a former teacher with roots in the island of Grenada, and his father, Dawood, built a career in the legal field, working in e-discovery and litigation support, helping law firms manage and handle digital evidence in court cases. David grew up with a younger brother named Caleb and a younger sister. And from a very young age, before any of the music, before the gaming, before any of it, David was a writer. From 5th grade, David was writing poetry. His grandmother gave him a poetry journal. He was writing short stories, comic books, and even downloading Japanese manga or manga, I don't know how you say it, please let me know, page by page on a Motorola phone. He read Dragon Ball and Tokyo Ghoul in 5th grade and became obsessed with the idea of characters who had powers but weren't traditional superheroes like Batman or Spider-Man. That fascinated David, and he started writing his own versions of those stories.
Christianity does have its strict rules, and this is one of them. Don't let anything in your life take up more of your time and take up more space in your mind than God, because we are all God's children.
Now, David came from a strict Christian household, and when I say strict, I mean strict. There was no secular music in that home, but underneath that strictness was a father who was also a gamer. Dawood had a basement in Queens that was basically his own world. A PS3, a PS2, a PS1, a Nintendo 64, Game Boys, all of it was down there. And from a very young age, David was in that basement with his dad. His father also practiced martial arts for over 20 years. He put David in martial arts at the age of 6.
Growing up as a kid, I'm a martial artist, training martial arts for 20 plus years. So the same work ethic and discipline that I had growing up, I wanted to reinforce that in David and Caleb.
It was his father who first introduced him to anime, something David has repeatedly described as one of his biggest creative influences throughout his life. So this is what home looked like for David Burke from his earliest years. Faith, discipline, a basement full of consoles, and a dad passing down his love for martial arts and Dragon Ball Z. And I think those details are pretty cool because from the outside, this sounds like a pretty normal family. Structured, religious, 2 working parents, a dad who comes home and goes downstairs to play games with his son, a mom who cooks Grenadian food. But there were rules in David's household. And those rules, specifically around what David was and wasn't allowed to consume, are going to become one of the most interesting parts in this entire story. The rules were about music. Now, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but let's touch on it a little more. Because I think when people hear no secular music, they move on very fast mentally without really registering what this actually means. Secular music is basically anything outside of gospel or religious music. So we're talking no hip-hop, no pop, no R&B, no rock, nothing outside of that, none of it. It was completely off limits. And David wasn't allowed to listen to any of it until he was 13 years old. But it goes even further than that. This wasn't just a household preference. It was enforced. His parents checked his phone every single week to make sure he was staying on the right track. So they were checking his phone to make sure none of this secular music outside of what he was allowed to listen to was infiltrating his playlist. Now this part is very interesting, and I wouldn't even say that this is too crazy at all. I think basically any mainstream music could fall under secular music. So this can just mean, for their particular situation, that they didn't allow him to listen to anything that had, let's say, swear words or certain themes like sex, drugs, violence, or what have you. And I wouldn't even say that this is a bad thing. However, what the human being is forbidden from becomes the attractive temptation. And as a kid, if you've gone your whole life being stopped from something, told no, kept away from it, never allowed to even taste it, I think that in itself can actually pull you toward it even harder. Basic psychology. Because what you can have becomes the thing you want the most, especially as a teenager. Because teenagers are already wired to push back, to test the boundaries, to want exactly what they've been told they can't have. That's just human nature at that age. What stands out to me here is the contrast. On one hand, you have this strict household with real boundaries around what he could consume. But on the other hand, his father's down in the basement sharing his world with his son. Dragon Ball Z, martial arts, consoles, all of it. That tells me creativity was always present in the home. It just had a specific shape to it. And I think that matters for any child's development. When imagination is fed early, through storytelling, through characters, through worlds bigger than your own, it plants something in your mind. And for David, I think that seed was planted very young. So he had an entry point to his creativity. Anime gave him characters. Martial arts gave him discipline. Gospel could have gave him an ear for melody and emotion before he even knew what to do with it. All these things were feeding something in him before he had any idea music was even in his future. And this is still middle school. He's still in public school at this time, still under his parents' roof. Same rules, same weekly phone checks, 13 years of gospel and classical music and nothing else. But here's the thing about walls. No matter how high you build them, eventually something gets through. And for David, it wasn't a gradual thing. It wasn't like he slowly started sneaking music in over time in his playlist or anything like that. It happened in one moment, one random day on a school bus in middle school. He's sitting there, a kid nearby has a backpack speaker, and a song comes on. And that song was Gucci Gang by Lil Pump.
I just discovered music 4 years ago. Until I was 13, I was only listening to purely gospel. And it wasn't until I heard Gucci Gang by Lil Pump on a bus in 7th grade.
That was the moment everything opened up for David. 13 years of one lane, and a random kid on a bus with a backpack speaker changed everything. But here's what I kept coming back to as I was researching him. The music is interesting, but what's even more interesting is the type of person David actually was. Because the way his mind worked, that's a whole different conversation. Chapter 2. The Boy Who Watched. To really understand who David Burke was, you have to understand this part of his personality. Because before he would become known to the world through his hit record Romantic Homicide, and before all this shit, David was a specific type of person. He had a very particular mind, and I think it's paramount to understand this aspect of him. At school, David was a people watcher.
I would just sit there and I'm a people watcher. I would just inspect them and write about them and stuff like that. And I kind of brought these characters to life that were inspired by my classmates. So every time I would write a short story, I'd have these different classmates in these stories, and they would never know. It's different names and everything, but they were inspired by my classmates.
He'd sit in the cafeteria and just observe his classmates, study them, and then he'd go home and write short stories inspired by what he saw, using different names, different details, but based on real people around him. His classmates had no idea they were characters in his stories. So it sounds like he created his own meaning from the outside world rather than fully participating in it and getting that meaning through experience. He treated everything around him as material, as a canvas, watched how people moved, how they talked, how they felt, and then went home and turned it into something of his own. That's my personal interpretation. And here's where it gets interesting, because the writing wasn't just something he did when he had time. It was something he needed to do, so much to the point where he was finding ways to make sure he always could write. And so a young David stole notebooks from school so he could write whatever, or I should say whenever he felt compelled to write. Now initially my first thought was, why didn't he just ask his parents for notebooks? But then again, maybe it wasn't that simple. Because when you really look at the type of background David came from, you start wondering how encouraged this side of him actually was. Was writing viewed as a real passion? Or was it looked at the same way music was? as a distraction, maybe even frowned upon? I don't have the answers to that. I'm kind of just asking these questions out loud, but it's worth asking, right? And regardless of the exact reason, the bigger point is what this behavior says about him. I'm not going to psychoanalyze him because I'm obviously not a psychologist, but the fact that he had to steal notebooks just to keep writing tells you that the urge to create was extremely strong. And also, to some extent, that David really couldn't control his impulses as a kid, right? But clearly writing felt urgent to him, and compulsive almost. Like he constantly needed somewhere to put all the thoughts in his head, the characters he was building in his mind, ideas and observations building up inside his head. So by all accounts, David seemed like a kid with a very rich internal world, quietly building stories and characters and ideas mostly by himself in his own mind. So he wasn't the loud kid. Definitely doesn't sound like he was super social either. He sat back, watched everybody else, studied people, and then went home and wrote about it. Sounds like he was very intense internally, very creatively obsessive, probably one of the curious types, highly observant socially even. I think a lot of times people like that do end up dealing with feelings of loneliness or have feelings of detachment internally. After all, he was spending most of his time observing the world instead of fully participating in it. Chapter 3. Private School and Relocation. Now, David attended a private school in Queens, and he described it as a place where the teachers had it out for him. Not just one teacher, by the way. According to him, it was multiple teachers, picking on him, bullying him for no reason he could identify. That's what he said.
Why did you
I didn't
hate
like
it?
my school. I was at a
'Cause
private
you said-
school, and they treated me so horribly, dude.
Why?
It was insane. I don't know. All the teachers had it out for me. My little brother could testify to that too. Dude, they just had it out for me all the time. I don't know what it was. I would just do nothing to nobody, and the teachers would just pick on me and bully me for no reason, bro. I wanted to leave that place so bad.
If this is true, no child deserves that kind of treatment. If this is true, and I'm only saying that because a lot of times kids can turn into completely different people when they're at school versus when they're at home. So in school, they're a demon, and then at home, they're like an angel, right? I think there's more to this aspect. I mean, I just don't know if I believe that teachers were randomly picking on David. For what? Maybe they saw a side of him that his parents didn't even know existed. I don't know. But according to David, this is what happened, and it clearly left a mark on him. If this is hypothetically true, then it's the kind of thing that obviously changes how you see authority, how you see the world outside of your home as a child. And then the relocation happened. His father Dawood's law firm transferred him to Houston, Texas, and David didn't mind one bit, stating that he hated New York at that point. And by the way, I did say law firm, but from the research that I did, David's father was actually never like an actual lawyer, but he did some type of legal work. I described it earlier. Now, different sources say different things as far as when he moved to Texas. Some outlets report David moved to Houston at the age of 13, but in his own words, in a sit-down interview, David says he was in 2nd or 3rd grade when the family moved to Texas. That would make him roughly 7 or 8 years old. I'm going to trust what David himself says over what outlets report for this one. And when he got to Houston, Texas, he immediately loved it. Different energy, different pace. He found kids who loved video games. He says he found his people, his tribe. And I think about that a lot because starting over is hard at any age, but it hits children differently. As an adult, you have context just about life in general. You understand that change can lead somewhere better. But as a kid, your whole world is your school, your friends, your routine. When that gets uprooted, a lot of times you don't have the mental tools yet to process it. You're just suddenly somewhere new with no map, or so it can feel. David found his footing in Houston pretty quickly. But that feeling of being uprooted, of the ground shifting underneath you, that was gonna hit him hard later. Chapter 4. The Boy Who Couldn't Commit. Now, while all this was happening, the move, settling into Houston, finding his feet, his mother Colleen is doing something quietly in the background that I think is one of the most underrated parts of this whole story. She keeps trying to get David into music multiple times, over multiple years. When he was 7, she put him in piano lessons. A young David didn't even last a week. Then she put him in church choir, and David quit that sometime after as well.
I was in choir for about like a year and a half. I quit because I got bored, and then I was in piano lessons for another like month or so. I quit because I got bored, and then fast forward to when I moved to Texas, I played the flute in middle school band. Quit because I got bored.
Later in 7th grade, he played flute in the middle school band, and this one actually stuck for a while. He says to this day he can still play the flute, but that ended when he got homeschooled and couldn't attend school band anymore. So music kept coming back to him and he kept walking away from it. Piano, he quit. Choir, quit. Flute, circumstances ended it. 3 separate attempts, like a bad relationship, none of them stuck. And notice something. Every single one of those attempts came from his mother, Colleen was the one putting him in piano. Colleen was the one putting him in choir. Colleen was the one with the musical vision for her son. His father, gaming, anime, martial arts, a completely different world. And here's what's interesting. Everything his mother introduced him to, he walked away from. Everything his father brought into his life, he ran toward it. Gaming became his career entry point. Anime became one of his biggest creative influences. Martial arts he still references to this day. Same kid, same household, completely different outcomes depending on who was doing the introducing. Interesting. So when I look at the pattern of quitting, I don't think it was a rejection of creativity. We already know how creativity was deeply embedded in David. And I don't think it was even a rejection of music specifically. I think it was a rejection of where it was coming from. His father's world felt like a discovery. His mother's world felt like instruction and like it was kind of like intruding his world. So it almost feels like every time creativity or some kind of suggestion came from his mother's direction, he pulled away from it. But every time it came from his father's world, he ran toward it, which makes his mother's role one of the most interesting ironies, I guess, in this whole story. Year after year, she kept planting something in him, or at least trying. And year after year, he kept rejecting it. But here's the thing about seeds. They don't always grow where you plant them. Or do they? Actually, I don't know. Y'all let me know. Because when music finally did click for David, it had nothing to do with lessons or structure or anyone's vision for him. It happened in a closet, on an iPhone, by himself. Not because somebody introduced it, but because a copyright strike took his money on, and he had no other option. And even then, it was still his decision, his terms, his world, because that's the thread that runs through David's entire childhood from the very beginning. What he embraced was always what he chose. And what somebody else chose for him, no matter how well-intentioned, he walked away from without looking back. His mother could offer, his mother could try, but David decided. That pattern started early, and it never really stopped. Chapter 5. The Quiet That Built Him. This is the chapter that I think is the most important one for understanding David Burke. And it's the one that almost nobody talks about. After 7th grade, his parents pull him out of school and begin homeschooling him. His mother, a former teacher, took on his education. Now on the surface, David actually has some positive things to say about homeschooling. Looking back, he taught himself to code. He learned how to build computers from scratch. All the gaming PCs he played on, he built himself. He described it as one of the best lessons in self-sufficiency he ever got.
Homeschooling has probably been one of the best life lessons of all time for just self-sufficiency. Learning the band lab, it was like I set out to do that myself completely. I started learning how to code by myself. Like when I was in the early stages of homeschooling, I had to do 2 electives for my college credits because when you're homeschooled, you have to kind of just build credits to be able to graduate. So I learned how to code C++ and Java for like 2 years. I was making like little mini games and I was credited towards my graduation.
But that's looking back as an adult with perspective. At the time, it was a completely different story for David. In his own words from a separate interview, he describes homeschooling as hell, specifically for the first 2 years. It was hell for the first 2 years. There was a transitional period from being around all these people, having so much to do after school and having all these outlets, to just being on a computer 9 hours a day by myself. 9 hours a day by himself, every single day. That is a whole lot of time in front of a computer for a kid. So he goes from a social environment, classmates, teachers, the structure of a school day, to complete isolation, just him and a screen. Now what's interesting is what happened after the homeschooling, specifically as it relates to his friendships, or his supposed friendships. So David had a very high Snapchat score. It was like 250,000. So he had these very high Snapchat streaks or scores, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the fuck you call it, right? With all these people he thought were his friends at school. But after he becomes homeschooled and disappears like a ghost, nobody gives a fuck. Okay, nobody cares. And that really messed with David.
When I was transitioning from public school to homeschooling and nobody like hit me up on Snapchat, when I was like streaking everybody, I had like, my Snap score was like 250,000, bro.
And nobody hits you back?
Nobody, dude.
What the fuck?
That's what I'm saying. Like nobody, like who, you not at school, where'd you go, Dave? Like nobody, like did I really have friends?
And that realization that people he thought were his friends didn't actually care about him at all, that sparks something inside of him. He later wrote a song called Worthless, directly about his experience. Now when I listen to David talk about these moments in his life, one thing that really stands out to me is I don't really hear much self-reflection. Now look, I'm not saying kids can't get abandoned by their friends, obviously that happens. However, at the end of the day, you are always going to be the common denominator in your own story. And if all these people around you didn't even notice that you basically disappeared, what does that actually say about you? Because according to David, the teachers were against him. The kids didn't understand him. The friends abandoned him. And again, maybe all of that was true. I don't really know, right? We honestly don't truly know what the truth is, because David is the author of his own story. But there's only one consistent factor in all these stories, and it's him. And personally, I can't help but notice that David almost always seems to position himself as the victim in these situations. I mean, why did these things happen? We don't fully know. But the bigger question to me is this: why exactly was David homeschooled in the first place? Maybe you have some thoughts about that, because that's something we've never really gotten a completely direct answer to. Now, if I had to guess, I would say religion probably played a major role. And now I'm talking about his family's decision to homeschool him. David's parents were reportedly extremely religious, and homeschooling is often done by families who want to separate their children from certain parts of the outside world, whether that's school culture, certain values, certain influences, or society in general. And obviously, now that David has been arrested for the alleged murder of a child, rest in peace to Celeste, a lot of people are naturally gonna kind of look back on this aspect and reanalyze his upbringing. For this part, a lot of people are asking, why was David homeschooled? Like, why was he pulled out of school? A lot of people are curious about that. So now a lot of people are kind of looking for signs, looking for patterns, looking for moments that may explain how somebody ends up accused of something this dark in the first place. Now, whether those signs were actually there or not, we honestly don't know. But what we can say is that David increasingly comes across as somebody who felt disconnected from the people around him for a very long time. That's obviously very evident from doing research on his story. So at this point, David is a teenager. He has no social life. He has no friends physically present in his world. The outside world exists to him almost entirely through a screen. So he goes deeper into the only thing that is available to him: video games, anime, writing, and Fortnite becomes the place where he finds something resembling community, because online, at least, there are people. Chapter 6: A World Behind the Screen. Now, to most people, Fortnite is just a video game. But for David, it was something else entirely. It was essentially his entire social world for years. It was where he met people, where he talked to people, where he had something that felt like real friendships. He took it seriously too. He joined competitive esports organizations. He was playing at a pretty high level. At one point, he claims to have gotten approximately 60 kills in a single game, which I'm guessing that's a pretty high kill. I don't know anything about Fortnite. I played it, but I just don't know. Is it high per game? I don't know. I was kind of cold at Call of Duty though, Black Ops 1. So David was really skilled at this game, okay? But it wasn't just about competing, because what those Fortnite lobbies actually gave David was something he couldn't get anywhere else at that point in his life: human connection. He's 14, 15 years old, somewhere there, homeschooled, no social life outside his home, and through a screen, he's talking to adults and teenagers from all over the world, people venting to him about their relationships, their heartbreaks, their problems, and David is absorbing all of this. In his own words, he loved living vicariously through people, through video games, movies, TV shows, through strangers on the internet telling him about their lives. And this is actually where his songwriting comes from. He said it himself in an interview. It was kind of me living vicariously through friends of mine, peers of mine, experiences they had. It was all personal. He wrote Romantic Homicide, a song about heartbreak before he had ever been in a relationship. He wrote about feelings he hadn't felt yet, about a life he wasn't living. Because at that point, the only world available to him existed through a screen, and somehow, millions of people felt every word of it. Chapter 7: The Accident That Changed Everything. So David starts posting his own Fortnite montage videos on YouTube under the name Chronic Ant, from his middle name Anthony. And he figures out quickly that if you put popular songs in your videos, the algorithm rewards you. Views go up, money comes in. His mom goes from telling him to get off the game to quietly acknowledging he might be onto something. And then YouTube starts issuing copyright strikes. UMG, the record labels, they start flagging his videos. His monetization disappears. The thing that was finally working stops working. He goes to his mom and he's kind of crying about it.
So then fast forward like a month or two, I'm making a lot of money. My mom's like, okay, maybe the game's not rotting your brain. I start getting copyright strikes left and right from UMG. And I'm like, what in the world is UMG? I don't know what UMG is.
Yeah.
So I'm not making any money now. I got the red money sign on all my videos. And I'm like crying to my mom about it. I'm like, yo, I don't know what to do. I'm not making any money anymore, blah, blah, blah. And she was like on a phone or something. She was like, just make your own music. Go, get out of my face. Make your own music.
And then his mother tells him something that completely changes his life. So his mother wasn't trying to launch a music career. She was trying to get him out the room so she could have some peace. I guess David was a little headache, right? But David took it completely seriously. His reaction was, wait, I could probably do that. And so this is when David starts doing research about how to actually create music. He Googles how to make music on an iPhone. An app called BandLab comes up. He downloads it, and then he needs somewhere to record. His little sister has the only walk-in closet in the house because, in his own words, she's spoiled. So he goes in, hangs up robes and blankets to absorb the sound, Apple earbuds in. The mic on the earbuds is his microphone, a free app and a pair of earbuds, that's the studio. And it's in this space that David is basically making all his music. And while David is working on his music in this house, his parents have no idea. Chapter 8, The Boy in the Closet. It's late 2021. David Burke is 16 years old, socially isolated for years. His entire world exists online. He has never been to a concert, never been in a relationship, never really lived the life teenagers around him were living. And he's sitting in his little sister's walk-in closet. And he presses record and freestyles. One take, no notebook, no revisions, just whatever is in his head in real time. And then he finds a beat on YouTube. It's like an indie type beat. He leases it for $20 from BeatStars. And his first song is called Runaway. His second song is You and I. He puts it in a Fortnite montage and titles the post, First Fortnite artist to use his own song in a montage, and drops his SoundCloud link. The next day, everyone is using his song in their own videos, and that spreads like a virus. Eventually, his song reaches 94 million streams, but he's still just a kid in a closet. Nobody knows what he looks like. Nobody knows his real name. He hasn't even shown his face once at this point. So I guess he pulled like a Blackie Speaks, right? Chapter 9, Romantic Homicide. In July 2022, David is in the back of his sister's closet, and he records another song, and he ends up doing it in one take. A song about heartbreak he had never experienced, pain he had never felt, a life he had never lived, pure imagination, pure isolation. He sits on it for a while. Maybe he thinks it's kind of like, he thinks it's too dark, basically, too violent. He's not sure. And this is his Romantic Homicide song. In the back of my mind, you died. Then he plays it for his mom in the car. Her reaction, she's like, David, this shit's too violent. You're talking about killing people in your music. It's not my son. Anyway, so he ends up dropping it, and it gets 500,000 views overnight. And eventually it reaches number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. A song made on a phone in a closet by a kid who had never been to a concert, never been in a relationship, never really lived any of what he was writing about, just borrowed pain in a free app. Chapter 10, The Tesla. Romantic Homicide changed everything. He eventually got a record deal, and that was the beginning of his popularity. From a closet above his parents' bedroom to the Billboard charts. And then, September 8th, 2025, a body in the trunk of a Tesla registered to David Anthony Burke is found in his car. And that's when everything changed for David. A strict household where the outside world was kept out, stolen notebooks, teachers who allegedly made his life difficult, a song on a school bus that cracked everything open, homeschooling that proved that friends were never real, years of solitude, a screen as a social life, a closet as a studio, and out of all that came a song about killing someone in the back of his mind, written about pain he had never felt by a kid so alone that imagined emotions were the only ones he had. Millions of people felt every word. The quiet that built him also produced everything he became, and then a body in a trunk. That same kid, but now he was facing some extremely disturbing allegations. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video, subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blackie Speaks, nice to meet you. That's David before his name got connected to the death of Celeste. And I know that was a lot, but I'm sure you have something to say about all this stuff that you just heard. What do you guys think? Y'all let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, I'm out.